The sun was leaning low over the wide plains when Caleb Turner returned to his ranch, his horse's hooves thudding softly against the dirt path. Late spring had come slow this year, coaxing wildflowers from the brittle ground like shy apologies. The air still held the bite of winter at dusk, the scent of dust and horses mingling with lilac. He swung down from the saddle, the weight of a long day pressing into his shoulders. His barn door hung ajar. He didn't remember leaving it that way. Caleb paused. The silence felt too careful, like someone holding their breath. He slipped the rifle from its hook, nudged the door open and stepped into the dim. Light fell in pale slices through the gaps in the wood. The smell of hay, leather, and something else, human, unfamiliar. Then a flicker of movement. He spoke low, steady as stone. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the nervous flutter of straw shifting. Then from behind a bale near the stall came the softest sound, half whisper, half tremble. A girl's voice. "Please, don't shoot." She stepped into the light like a secret too fragile to keep. She couldn't have been more than 20, slender, with soot-dark hair and travel-worn clothes that hung loose around her frame. Her eyes, almond-shaped, deep brown, carried a calm that fought against fear. A Chinese girl, he realized, though it had been years since he'd seen one this far inland. Caleb lowered the rifle slightly. "You alone out here?" The girl swallowed hard, her English broken but clear enough. "No. My mother, outside." Her lips quivered as if the words themselves hurt to say. "She, sick." A cold weight settled in Caleb's gut. He'd heard stories, immigrant families left to fend for themselves when work ran dry. Some buried by the roadside before the thaw. He hesitated, glancing toward the open door and the fading daylight spilling through it. "Show me," he said at last. She led him across the field, her bare feet quick over grass damp with dew. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the tall reeds, lay an old handcart. Inside, under a threadbare blanket, was an older woman. Her breathing rattled softly, chest rising shallow, lips pale as ash. The girl knelt beside her. "Mama," she whispered. The woman stirred but didn't wake. Caleb knelt too, pressing a hand to her brow. "Fever. Too high to wait." He didn't think. He simply moved. He lifted the frail woman in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder like a child's. The girl followed silently, clutching the hem of his coat. Inside the cabin, firelight bloomed to life under his hands. He laid the woman gently on his own bed. The girl hovered near the hearth, eyes wide with both gratitude and caution. Caleb fetched a damp cloth, pressed it to the woman's face, then stepped back. "She'll need rest," he said quietly. "And food." The girl nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you, mister. My name. Maylin." He gave a small nod in return. "Caleb Turner." They stood in awkward silence, the crackle of the fire between them. Maylin glanced toward her mother, then at him, then down at her folded hands. Her face held the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in days, but also a quiet dignity that unsettled him. He'd seen beggars, drifters, even settlers driven mad by loss, but this was something else. She carried her fear like a secret burden, refusing to let it break her. He moved to the door, looking out at the open land. The wind dragged whispers through the grass. "You can stay tonight," he said. "After that, we'll see." Her lips parted as though to thank him, but no words came. Only a small, trembling bow of her head. The night settled heavy over the ranch. Coyotes sang from the far hills. Caleb sat by the fire, pretending to read while watching the girl out of the corner of his eye. She had washed her mother's face with careful hands, arranged her blanket, and now sat on the floor by the bed, her eyes fixed on the flames. Her whispering voice drifted low, Chinese words he couldn't understand, yet something in their rhythm soothed him. It reminded him of lullabies his wife once hummed when the world outside seemed crueler than usual. He dozed, woke to silence. The girl had risen, staring out the small window. Moonlight painted her face silver. She turned suddenly. "You have wife?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Had." Pause. Her eyes lowered. "I sorry." The simplicity of it, no curiosity, no pity, cut through him like wine through wheat. He hadn't spoken his wife's name aloud in years, not since the fever took her. Something about this stranger's gentleness made him feel the ache as though it were new. "Rest," he said quietly. Maylin nodded and lay near the hearth. The faintest smile touched her lips before sleep claimed her, a smile that looked like hope daring to return. Caleb watched her a long while. There was danger in this, he knew it. The town had grown suspicious of kindness. A white man sheltering foreigners could bring whispers or worse. But watching the girl's chest rise and fall beside the fire, he realized some risks were older than laws. The fire burned low. He rose, draping a quilt over her. When his fingers brushed her sleeve, she stirred but did not wake. Her skin was ice cold. He poured another log onto the coals, watching sparks leap upward like tiny souls seeking heaven. Outside, the moon climbed high, laying silver across the hills. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, the rifle resting against the post. The land was still, except for the faint creak of the barn doors he hadn't fully shut. The same place he'd found her. He thought of the way she'd whispered please, how fragile that sound had been, and how it had changed the quiet in his chest. He felt for the first time in years that the house was not empty. When he turned back toward the cabin, the lamplight caught movement inside. Maylin was kneeling by her mother again, whispering something through tears he couldn't hear. Then, barely audible, she looked up toward the doorway as though sensing him. Her voice came fragile but clear. Please don't send us away when morning comes. And though Caleb didn't answer, the look in his eyes said what words could not. Something had already shifted. The man who'd opened his door to strangers was not the same one who would face the dawn. Morning came slowly, the kind that slipped across the land like a whisper rather than a song. Light poured through the thin curtains of Caleb's cabin, catching on the steam from a pot Maylin had placed over the fire. The air carried the scent of rice and wild herbs, foreign and comforting all at once. Caleb stirred from his chair, the ache of sleep caught in his back, and found her kneeling near the hearth, moving with quiet precision, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair braided loosely down her back. Her mother slept still, chest rising shallow under the patchwork quilt. The fever had broken during the night, though her skin remained pale as candle wax. Maylin dipped a cloth into cool water, wrung it out with care, and pressed it to her mother's forehead. Her movements had the softness of prayer. Caleb found himself watching longer than he meant to. You've been up since dawn, he said finally. She turned, startled but not afraid. I've wanted to help. I clean, I cook. You let us stay. Her English was clumsy, but her meaning was clear. Gratitude wrapped in guilt. He nodded, wordless. Outside, the land hummed with the pulse of a late spring morning. The hum of cicadas, the creak of the barn settling under sunlight, the low murmur of cattle beyond the fence. It should have been peaceful, yet Caleb felt something restless beneath the calm. He knew what the town would say if they found out. By noon he saddled his horse and rode into Carson Creek for supplies. The town lay dusty and mean under a washed-out sky. Folks nodded at him in passing, though some eyes lingered too long. At the general store, Martha Hendricks stood by the counter, a widow whose words traveled faster than wind. Well, if it isn't Caleb Turner, she said, her voice coated in honey and judgment. Heard you've been keeping company out at your place. Travelers, are they? He measured his breath, stacking tins on the counter. A mother and daughter. Needed a roof for a night. She leaned in, her perfume sharp as vinegar. You be careful. Folks don't take kindly to strangers these days, especially those kind. Her tone made the word those sound heavier than any curse. Caleb paid his bill and left without replying, though her words clung to him all the way home. The wind picked up as he rode back. Clouds drifted like bruises across the horizon. When he reached the ranch, he found Maylin outside by the fence, her hands buried in feed grain. She looked up when she saw him, sunlight gilding her face. I feed horses, she said shyly. They like me, I think. He smiled faintly. They like anyone kind. She didn't understand the words fully, but his tone softened her shoulders. Together they carried water to the trough. He noticed her palms, raw and reddened from labor, but she made no complaint. When one of the colts nosed her sleeve, she laughed softly, the sound like wind through chimes. He hadn't heard laughter on this land since his wife died. It startled him with its purity. Later, while Maylin washed clothes at the creek, Caleb chopped wood by the cabin. Each swing of the axe punctuated thoughts he didn't wish to have. What if Martha spoke to the sheriff? What if someone decided to teach him a lesson for breaking the unspoken lines of race and decency this town loved to guard? Inside, Lien woke again, whispering in her native tongue. Maylin hurried to her side, drying her hands on her skirt. The mother's voice was faint but steady. Caleb couldn't understand the words, but when Maylin turned toward him, her eyes shone with moisture. She says, "Thank you. You good man." He looked away, uncomfortable beneath the praise. I'm just doing what anyone should. No, Maylin said softly, shaking her head. Not everyone kind. The simplicity of her truth sank deep. He left the room, stepping onto the porch to breathe. The air carried the sweetness of rain far off, mingled with the smoke from his chimney. For a long moment he just stood there, letting the quiet shape itself around him. That evening he fixed the fence line while Maylin prepared supper. When he came in, the cabin smelled of garlic and broth, a taste of another world. Lien sat propped against pillows, her hair brushed smooth, her frail hands folded in her lap. They ate in silence at first. Caleb wasn't used to company, let alone grace. Maylin moved with a gentleness that made even the clatter of utensils seem reverent. Afterward, she offered him tea, bowing her head slightly as she handed him the cup. "Back home," she murmured, "we give tea to show respect." He accepted it, fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. Something quiet passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. As night deepened, Lien drifted into sleep again, her breathing steadier. Maylin sat near the window, sewing the torn sleeve of his work shirt she'd found by the door. The sound of her needle against cloth was soft, steady, like rain beginning. Caleb watched, words sitting heavy on his tongue. "You don't have to," he said. She didn't look up. "I want to. You help us." He had no answer for that. The truth was, he didn't know why he had helped, only that her presence had broken the hollow rhythm of his life. Yet beneath the quiet grew a deeper unease, one that whispered of things the town might not forgive. Later, a wagon's rattle echoed faintly down the dirt road. Caleb went to the door, hand brushing his rifle. The sound faded into the distance, leaving only the wind. Still, the tension lingered. He turned back to see Maylin watching him, worry etched between her brows. "People not like us here," she said softly. "I see how they look." He met her gaze. "They don't see what I see." Her lips parted slightly, but before she could speak, a faint groan came from the bedroom. Lien was awake, her face drawn with pain. Maylin rushed to her side. Caleb followed, fetching water, holding the basin while the girl dabbed her mother's temples. Lien's eyes opened, finding him. She reached out a trembling hand. "She's strong," she whispered weakly. "But world not kind. Promise, protect her." Her accent was thick, but the plea was clear. Caleb felt something old in him stir, a vow that went deeper than words. He nodded once. "I'll see to her." Lien smiled faintly and slipped back into sleep. The room grew still except for the rhythmic sound of rain beginning outside. Maylin looked at him then, eyes bright with unshed tears. "She thinks maybe we safe here." Caleb glanced toward the window, where the rain blurred the lantern light into trembling halos. "You are," he said quietly, though even as he spoke, doubt crawled at the edge of his heart. Thunder rolled far off in the valley. He felt the weight of the moment settle between them, something fragile yet unspoken. Outside, the rain gathered strength, beating against the roof, whispering promises neither of them knew how to keep. Then through the storm's hum came a different sound, the echo of hoofbeats approaching, steady and sure. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He stepped to the door, rifle within reach. Maylin froze, her hands trembling above the wash basin. "Who?" Caleb's jaw tightened as lantern light flickered across his face. "We're about to find out." The knock came hard against the wooden door, breaking the rhythm of the rain, and for the first time that night, the warmth inside the cabin felt suddenly very small. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, like someone testing not just the door but the courage behind it. Caleb stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Maylin stood frozen by the hearth, her hands clenched in her skirt, her breath trembling. The storm outside made the lamplight sway and stutter. He opened the door. Sheriff Hollis filled the threshold, water dripping from his hat brim. He was a large man with a face weathered by the plains, the kind that looked carved rather than born. Behind him, rain blurred the outline of his horse, a dark shape shifting in the downpour. "Evenin', Caleb," the sheriff said, voice calm but edged with duty. "Got a word?" Caleb gave a slow nod. "Comin' out of the rain." The sheriff stepped inside, wiping his boots. His eyes swept the cabin. The fire, the quilts, the figure of a woman lying weakly in bed, and the girl beside her who quickly bowed her head. He removed his hat but didn't sit. "Got word from town you might have some travelers out here. Folks seen a wagon broke down near the Ridge Road. Chinese family, maybe?" Caleb kept his voice even. "They needed shelter. The mother's sick." Hollis nodded once, gaze steady. "You know what folks are like these days. Lot of nerves about strangers. Railroad trouble, wage disputes. I'm just here to be sure nobody's stirring up gossip." Maylin looked from one man to the other, not understanding every word, but feeling the tension heavy in the air. Caleb caught her eyes briefly, then faced the sheriff again. "They're no trouble," he said. "I'll see them on their way once the mother's fit to travel." Hollis sighed, rubbing the brim of his hat between his hands. You always had a soft spot, Turner. Just watch yourself. There's talk. When the sheriff left, the rain had softened to a mist, the world outside muffled like a dream. Caleb watched his silhouette fade into the dark, then shut the door. Maylin stepped closer, her voice barely above the whisper of rain. He angry? No, Caleb said, though his tone carried the doubt he wouldn't name. Just doing his job. She nodded, though her eyes told him she understood more than she let on. Days passed, the world settling into a quiet rhythm. The mother slept, her fever easing, though her strength never returned fully. Caleb mended fences and gathered feed, and Maylin, though she moved silently, began to fill the spaces of the house with small acts of grace. Fresh flowers in a chipped mug, clean linens hung in the sun, tea waiting by the hearth when he came in from the fields. Each evening, the wind would carry the scent of sage and rain, and the two would share a table without words. He learned the small sounds of her life, the soft hum of her voice when she cooked, the faint laugh when the colt nuzzled her hand. Yet under it all ran a thread of unease. The sheriff's visit had left something unsettled. One morning Caleb rode into town for salt and nails. The air felt wrong the moment he entered, too still, too watchful. Conversations hushed when he passed. Martha Hendricks's sharp voice cut through the quiet from the mercantile porch. Not right, Caleb, she called out, her tone coated in sugar. Keeping that foreign girl out there. People talk. We got standards. He stopped, turning to face her. The whole street seemed to lean in. You got a problem with decency, Martha? Her mouth twitched and used to being challenged. You know what I mean. It ain't proper. He looked at her long enough for her to look away, then mounted his horse and rode out without another word. But by the time he reached home, his chest felt heavy. The town was turning. That night, Maylin sensed it too. She asked about the whispers she saw in his face. He tried to wave it off, but she pressed gently, her voice trembling like a leaf in wind. They hate me? They don't know you, he said. That's all. Her gaze dropped. In my country, my mother said, people fear what they don't understand. Same here, yes. He nodded slowly. Same everywhere. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was knowing. They sat side by side near the hearth, the fire casting soft light across their faces. For a moment, the loneliness between them felt bridged by something wordless, something that breathed like a promise. Then from the bedroom a weak cough broke the calm. They rushed to Lien's side. She looked smaller than ever, her lips cracked, eyes glassy with pain. She reached for her daughter's hand. No tears, she murmured in Chinese, then turned her gaze toward Caleb. She's all I have. She needs safe place. Her voice was faint, fading like the last warmth of day. Caleb felt his throat tighten. He wanted to promise her the world, but he knew how fragile words could be. You rest, he said gently. We'll talk when you're stronger. But she didn't answer. That night, rain returned, a soft, sorrowful rhythm against the roof. Maylin sat awake beside her mother, whispering songs under her breath, old tunes from a faraway home. Caleb sat by the doorway, hat in his hands, watching the fire dim. At dawn, the singing stopped. He looked up and saw Maylin kneeling by the bed, her body shaking with silent sobs. Her mother's hand rested limply in hers. The air felt thick, as if the room itself were holding its breath. He stepped forward, his voice rough. I'm sorry. Maylin didn't answer. She simply leaned forward, pressing her forehead to her mother's hand. Her braid slipped loose, falling over her shoulder. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but something told him that grief had to speak first before comfort could be heard. Hours passed before she rose. Her face was pale but composed, eyes red yet steady. She say before, she whispered, her accent breaking on each word, I stay here. Help you. Live good life. He swallowed hard. She wanted you safe. And you are. She gave a slow nod, though neither of them fully believed it. Together they buried Lien on the small hill beyond the orchard, where the earth smelled of rain and wild mint. Maylin knelt in the damp soil, placing a small wooden hairpin atop the fresh mound, the same one Caleb had seen her clutch the night they met. The wind lifted her braid as she whispered a prayer. Caleb stood behind her, hat over his heart. When they returned to the cabin, evening was already drawing its long shadows. He built a fire, the glow spilling across her weary face. She sat quietly, fingers tracing the rim of her mother's teacup. She loved this place, Maylin said softly. Said it feel like peace. Caleb stared into the flames. Then she'll have peace here. For a moment the world felt still again. But as night deepened, a sound rose from the valley, the distant echo of wagon wheels, heavy and deliberate. Mayleen's head snapped up, eyes wide. Caleb stood slowly, his face hardening. "You expecting anyone?" She shook her head, fear flickering across her features. The wagon's rattle grew closer, iron against stone. And then came the unmistakable creak of brakes outside, followed by footsteps, 2, maybe 3, crunching through the mud toward the cabin. Caleb reached for his rifle. Mayleen clutched her mother's hairpin to her chest. The door shuddered once under a heavy fist. "Open up," a voice called from outside, rough, accented, and unfriendly. "We've come for the girl." The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the knocking, slow, deliberate, like the sound of fate testing the hinges. Caleb stood motionless, rifle gripped in his calloused hands. Mayleen's breath came shallow, her back pressed against the hearth. The fire threw thin light across her face, painting her fear in gold and shadow. The voice outside came again, rough and certain. "Open up, rancher. We know she's here." Caleb's eyes met Mayleen's. Her fingers tightened around her mother's hairpin, the small wooden ornament trembling in her grip. The rain whispered against the windows, gathering strength. He took a long breath, set the rifle against the wall, and opened the door. 2 men stood on the porch, dark silhouettes against the storm. Their coats were soaked, faces half hidden under broad hats. The taller one stepped forward, rain rolling off his beard. "Name's Frank Cho. We come from the railroad camp down by Carson Gorge. The girl and her mother took work there months ago. Ran off owing money. Her old lady's dead, I heard. But the girl, she's still property till the debt's paid." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's no one's property." Frank's smile was thin and humorless. "You saying that makes her yours?" The second man snorted, spitting rainwater into the mud. Caleb felt his pulse thrum in his ears. The words he wanted to say lodged in his throat, replaced by the slow burn of anger rising in his chest. "You can tell your boss," he said quietly, "that no one here owes him a damn thing." Frank's grin widened. "Then I'll tell him where to find her." He turned to go, but Caleb's voice stopped him cold. "You won't make it far." The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, washing away hesitation. For a long moment the 3 men stood frozen, only the wind moving between them. Then Frank laughed, sharp as steel scraping bone. "You think one man can stop the railroad?" Caleb didn't answer. The door shut between them with a sound that felt final. Inside, Mayleen sank to her knees. "They take me," she whispered. "If you fight, they hurt you too." He crouched beside her, voice low. "I won't let them." She shook her head. "Law on their side." He looked toward the shuttered window. "Then the law's wrong." Her eyes lifted to his face, steady, searching. "Why you care?" For a heartbeat, the question hung in the air, soft as smoke. He wanted to say, "Because you remind me what hope looks like," but the words wouldn't come. Instead he said, "Because someone should." They didn't sleep that night. Caleb sat near the door, rifle across his knees, while Mayleen tended the dying fire. The storm raged on, thunder echoing across the valley like distant drums. When dawn broke, it brought a gray light and a strange stillness, the kind that made every sound sharper. By mid-morning they saw dust rising along the ridge, 2 wagons this time with 4 men riding alongside. Mayleen stood by the window, face pale. "They come." Caleb nodded once, pulling on his coat. "Go to the back. Stay low." But she didn't move. "If they kill you, I have no home. Let me stand." He met her gaze and saw something in her he hadn't before, not fragility but defiance. He nodded slightly. "Then stand close." The men dismounted, boots sinking in the wet earth. Frank stepped forward again, hands resting near his revolver. "Didn't figure you for a fool, Turner. But looks like you are one." Caleb didn't rise to the bait. "You're trespassing." Frank laughed. "You think this land's yours to defend? We take what's owed." The nearest man moved toward the barn. Caleb raised the rifle, his voice calm as a river before a fall. "Step one more foot and you'll never step again." The moment hung there, brittle as glass. Then one of the men swung his gun up. The shot cracked through the still air, grazing the porch beam and shattering a lantern. Mayleen cried out. Caleb fired once, clean, instinctive. The man dropped where he stood. Silence swallowed the world. The others froze, shock rippling across their faces. Frank's expression hardened, but something uncertain flickered in his eyes. He spat into the mud. "You'll hang for that." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But you'll bleed first if you take another step." Rain began again, slow at first, then steady. It soaked their coats, their boots, the still body in the mud. For a long moment no one moved. Then Frank motioned to his men. "We'll be back," he said. "With papers. With law." They turned and rode off, leaving ruts that filled quickly with rainwater. Inside, Malin stood trembling, the rifle's echo still pulsing in her ears. "You kill man," she whispered. Caleb's hands shook as he set the rifle down. "To save you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, not of fear but something deeper. "Now they come for you. I bring trouble." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You brought life back into this place. I'll take trouble over emptiness." For the first time she reached for his hand. Her touch was light, tentative, but it steadied him more than any promise could. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, the sky swollen with gray. They worked through the day preparing to leave, packing what little they had, dried meat, water, a few coins. Malin folded her mother's blanket carefully, eyes distant. "We run again," she murmured. "No," Caleb said, fastening the saddle. "We ride for freedom, not fear." The wind picked up as they rode into the open valley. The land stretched endless ahead, washed clean by rain, the horizon smeared in gold and blue. Malin clung to the saddle horn, her hair streaming behind her. Caleb glanced back once, the cabin shrinking, smoke still curling from its chimney. By dusk they reached the canyon road. The world seemed to hold its breath. Birds scattered from the cliffs, startled by a sound, hooves, many of them echoing from behind. Malin's voice trembled. "They come." Caleb urged the horse faster, but the road narrowed, cut by a stream swollen from the rain. They could hear the pursuers gaining ground, shouts rising through the wind. He turned to her, rain cutting through his hair. "Hold on." The horse leapt the narrow stream, landing hard on the far side. Mud splashed their boots. Behind them, Frank's voice roared through the canyon, angry and relentless. As they rode deeper into the valley, the sky cracked open with lightning, the world lit in silver for a heartbeat. Malin looked back, and saw the bridge behind them give way under the weight of a wagon. The crash echoed like thunder swallowed by the earth. They stopped at the ridge, hearts pounding. The storm's roar faded to a hollow quiet. Caleb looked at her, rain running down his face like tears. "We can't go back now." Malin's eyes glistened, wide with both terror and awe. "Then where we go?" He looked toward the far hills, where the clouds parted just enough to show a sliver of light. "Someplace new. Someplace free." But even as he said it, hoofbeats echoed faintly again in the distance, distant but not gone. The sound rolled through the valley like the promise of unfinished reckoning, and both of them knew, the past was not done chasing yet. The valley was quiet after the storm, but not at peace. The wind carried the smell of wet sage and earth newly torn open, the air still trembling with the memory of thunder. Caleb and Malin rode in silence along the narrow pass, the horses' hooves sinking deep into the mud. The sun had not yet broken through the heavy clouds. Its light lay hidden, a promise withheld. Every few minutes, Caleb glanced over his shoulder. The echo of hoofbeats had faded for now, but he knew men like Frank Cho didn't quit. Not when pride and debt were tangled together. Malin sat behind him, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed lightly to his back. She said nothing, though he felt her shivering through the damp fabric of her dress. When they finally stopped, it was near a grove of cottonwoods where a creek ran bright and fast from the mountain runoff. Caleb dismounted, helped her down, and led the horse to drink. The quiet between them was heavy but not empty, it pulsed with everything unspoken. Malin knelt by the water, washing the blood from her palms, blood not her own but from the man Caleb had shot. The red swirled in the current and vanished downstream. She stared at it as if watching something sacred leave her. "He was cruel," Caleb said softly, crouching beside her. "He'd have hurt you." She shook her head, not in disagreement but sorrow. "When someone die, heaven see both hearts. Yours heavy now." He didn't answer. His reflection in the stream looked older than he felt. A man carved from grief and duty, the kind the world mistook for stone. He reached for her hand, stopping her trembling fingers. "If I could have spared him, I would have." Her gaze met his, dark eyes holding a quiet strength. "You saved me. That not sin." They stayed like that until the wind softened, until her breathing steadied. When they rose, he saw the exhaustion written in the slope of her shoulders. She was too thin, too young to have known so much fear. Yet she carried herself with a dignity that seemed to shame the cruelty of the world. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack at the edge of the ridge, a one-room cabin left from an old trapping trail. Inside, the smell of pine and dust hung thick, the roof patched with rusted tin. Caleb started a small fire while Malin gathered the dry kindling he broke apart. The light spread across the room, touching her face, her hands, her silence. As dusk deepened, they sat side by side near the hearth. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, weak but hot. She sipped it slowly, her eyes fixed on the flames. "When my mother alive," she said quietly, "she tell me stories of river spirits. They say when storm come, it wash away what meant to stay behind." He listened, her voice soft and rhythmic, as though the words were part of the fire itself. "What do the spirits say after?" he asked. "They say sun come again. Always come." He smiled faintly. "Your mother was a wise woman. She say I will meet man with quiet eyes. Kind man. Not many words but truth." She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward him. "I think maybe she mean you." Caleb stared into the fire, heart caught between gratitude and fear. He'd buried his wife 5 years before and told himself love was not meant to visit twice in one lifetime. But this girl, this woman, had found her way into the empty spaces of his soul without trying. Before he could speak, the horse outside snorted, uneasy. He rose immediately, stepping to the doorway. The valley lay cloaked in moonlight, silver and still. Then, faintly, came the sound he dreaded, hooves again, distant but closing. He turned back to Maylin. "We have to move." She stood, gripping the hairpin in her hand. "No more running," she said. Her voice was trembling but sure. "You fight for me, I fight for you." He looked at her, truly looked, saw not the frightened girl from his barn, but a woman who had already lost everything except her courage. He nodded once. "Then we end it tonight." They doused the fire and led the horse into the trees. The moon broke through the clouds, lighting the path in cold silver. Down below, torches flickered along the ridge. Frank chose men, maybe 4 of them now, moving steady, calling to each other over the wind. Caleb tied the horse behind a boulder and checked his rifle. Maylin crouched beside him, her breath visible in the cold. "If we hide forever," she whispered, "they win." He swallowed hard. "You trust me?" "With life." He squeezed her hand once, then rose into the open clearing. The moonlight caught his figure, broad, resolute, the rifle glinting faintly in his grasp. Frank spotted him first, reining in his horse. "Should have kept right in, Turner," he shouted. "Ain't no law protectin' thieves and their whores." Caleb didn't move. "She's free, Cho. So am I." The men spread out, circling slowly. One raised his gun, and the world cracked open with the sound of thunder. Metal on metal, smoke blooming through the night. Caleb fired once, ducked behind the rocks, reloaded. Sparks burst against the stone. Maylin crawled to his side, clutching a pistol he'd given her earlier. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. "I see one," she hissed. "Wait till he's close." When the man crept from the shadows, she pulled the trigger. The shot rang clean. He fell, torch tumbling from his grasp and setting dry grass alight. Fire leapt upward, painting the valley in gold and red. Frank cursed, charging forward. Caleb stepped out, fired once more. The bullet tore through the brim of Frank's hat. "You won't win this," Caleb said. Frank snarled, lunging toward him. The 2 men collided, crashing to the ground. Mud, blood, and rain mixed beneath them. The rifle fell aside. Caleb's fists found Frank's jaw. Frank's knife flashed in return. They rolled through the wet grass, grunting, the fire casting monstrous shadows. Maylin shouted his name, running toward them. Frank swung his blade. Caleb caught his wrist, twisting hard until bone cracked. The knife fell. With one final surge, Caleb struck him across the temple. Frank collapsed, motionless. For a moment only the fire spoke, crackling, wild, alive. Caleb staggered back, chest heaving. Maylin dropped the pistol and ran to him. Her hands found his face, trembling. "You hurt." He shook his head, breath shallow. "Only tired." She looked toward Frank's body, then back at him. "It done?" He nodded slowly, though they both knew nothing in this world was ever truly done. Still, something had shifted. The air felt lighter, the silence softer. The fight, the running, the fear, they had carried it far enough. As the flames died down, the first light of dawn crept over the ridge, pale and tender. The land, washed clean, seemed to breathe again. Caleb turned to Maylin, her hair damp and tangled, her face streaked with soot and tears. "You're free now," he said. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "No," she whispered. "We free." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. In that fragile dawn, with smoke still curling from the grass and the valley humming with new life, they stood together, 2 souls the world had tried to break, finding instead that it had forged them. Later, as they buried the past beneath the ash, Maylin placed her mother's hairpin in the soil beside the creek. The water caught the morning light, carrying it downstream like a blessing. Caleb watched her, the quiet filling him with something that felt like faith. When she turned back, her eyes shone. "Where we go now?" He looked toward the rising sun where the hills burned gold. "Home," he said simply. "Wherever we build it." She smiled faintly, and for the first time since he'd found her in that barn, the fear was gone. The valley lay wide before them, the sky opening like a promise. And as they rode toward it, side by side, the wind carried away the last echo of the storm, leaving only the sound of hooves fading into morning, and the beginning of a peace neither had ever dared to dream.